Hello, my name is August Klon and I am the youth coordinator at St. Anne Catholic Church. Today we are going to be starting a 4-part series on the 10 Commandments. The first part is going to be about the greatest commandment. In the Gospel of Matthew, we have an account of a Pharisee coming up and testing Jesus. And he asks him, what is the greatest commandment? In Matthew chapter 22, verses 34 through 40, it reads, When the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together, and one of them, a scholar of the law, tested him by asking, Teacher, which commandment in the law is the greatest? He said to them, You shall love the Lord your God with all your hearts, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and the first commandment. The second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. The whole law and the prophets depend on those two commandments. The whole law and the prophets depend on these two commandments. These words from Jesus Christ are very significant going forward as to what all this ultimately leads up to. Now, we won't get that until our last episode here. But for right now, we are going to go forward and see what does it mean to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, and with all your soul. And how does it mean to love your neighbor? How does God teach us to do these things? In the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 10, it says, At the time the Lord said to me, Cut 2 stone tablets like the first ones, and come up the mountain to me. Also make an ark out of wood. I will write upon the tablets the words that were on the tablets that you broke, and you shall place them in the ark. So I made an ark of acacia wood, and cut 2 stone tablets like the first ones, and went up to the mountain with the 2 tablets in my hand. Then the Lord wrote on the tablets, as he had written before, the 10 words that the Lord had spoken to you on the mountain from the midst of the fire on the day of the assembly. And the Lord gave them to me. Then I turned and came down from the mountain, and placed the tablets in the ark I had made. There they have remained as the Lord commanded me. Now the reason I picked this passage is because it is about the only place in Scripture where it doesn't just refer to them as the commandments, but it explicitly says, these are the 10 words of God. Or as is often translated, the 10 commandments. This is what we understand. And the 10 commandments are really important to us because we got 2 commandments from Jesus. And these are both in Deuteronomy, and the second is found in Leviticus. But these commandments say, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul, with all your strength. And the other says to love your neighbor as yourself. But while these commands are very simple and they should be easy to follow, what happened is we as people tend to use our intellect and our free will in ways that God doesn't want us to, in ways that it was not intended to be used. So taking simple commands, we end up start twisting all sorts of ways to try and say, well, is this loving my neighbor? Is this how I love God? People start finding their own ways to worship God, and their own ways which they consider to be being kind of our neighbor and loving them as I love myself. And quite often they aren't that. We aren't loving our God with all our heart, with all our mind, with all our strength. And we aren't loving our neighbor as ourselves. But we twist our way of thinking to try and excuse what we're doing and say, no, this is loving my neighbor, and this is love of God. This is why we have the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments are the 10 basic words from God that says, I want you to love me with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul, and all your strength. I want you to love your neighbor as yourself. And this is how you do that. And by following these 10 Commandments, this is right worship of God. So there are 2 accounts of the 10 Commandments in the Bible. The first is in Exodus chapter 20, and the second is in Deuteronomy chapter 5. Now, because of the organization, and it's easier to explain that way, and since Deuteronomy came second, they had refined their explanation of the 10 Commandments in a way that was easier to follow. Both of them are pretty easy to follow. They tell you the same thing. But as far as using a catechetical formula of teaching, of making it easier to understand what's actually being said, the set in Deuteronomy does order things just so ever slightly differently that these sins are actually grouped together the way they should be, rather than mixing in different sins together. So in the book of Deuteronomy, it's in chapter 5, verses 6 through 21, it says, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. out of the house of slavery. You shall not have other gods beside me. You shall not make for yourself an idol or a likeness of anything in the heavens above, or on the earth below, or in the water beneath the earth. You shall not bow down before them or serve them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, bringing punishment for their parents' wickedness on the children of those who hate me, down to the third and fourth generation, but showing love down to the 1,000th generation of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not invoke the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not leave unpunished anyone who invokes his name in vain. Observe the Sabbath, keep it holy, as the Lord your God commanded you. 6 days you may labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath of the Lord your God. You shall not do any work, either you, your son, or your daughter, your male or female slave, your ox or donkey, or any work animal, or the resident alien within your gates, so that your male and female slaves may rest as you do. Remember that you too were once slaves in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out from there with a strong hand and an outstretched arm. That is why the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath. Honor your father and your mother, as the Lord your God has commanded you, that you may have a long life and that you may prosper in the land the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not kill, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not bear dishonest witness against your neighbor, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife, you shall not desire your neighbor's house or field, his male or female slave, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. Now, this whole list is the 10 Commandments, the 10 words of God. This is what was presented. So what we want to do is we want to look at that and look at each individual command in here and see how what the commandments are. What are the 10 Commandments? So it begins, again, I'm the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. 1, you shall not have other gods beside me. 2, you shall not make for yourself an idol or a likeness of anything in the heavens above, or on the earth below, or in the water beneath the earth. 3, you shall not bow down before them or serve them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, bringing punishment for their parents' wickedness on the children of those who hate me, down to the third and fourth generation, but showing love down to the 1,000th generation of those who love me and keep my commandments. 4, you shall not invoke the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not leave unpunished anyone who invokes his name in vain. 5, observe the Sabbath, keep it holy, as the Lord your God commanded you. 6 days you may labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath of the Lord your God. 6, you shall not do any work, either you, your son, or your daughter, your male or female slave, your ox or donkey, or any work animal, or the resident alien within your gates, so that your male and female slave may rest as you do. Remember that you too were once slaves in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out from there with a strong hand and outstretched arm. That is why the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. 7, honor your father and your mother as the Lord your God has commanded you, that you may have a long life and you may prosper in the land the Lord your God is giving you. 8, you shall not kill. 9, you shall not commit adultery. 10, you shall not steal. 11, you shall not bear dishonest witness against your neighbor. 12, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife. 13, you shall not desire your neighbor's house or field, his male or female slave, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. Now, reading through this, we actually counted 13 individual commands. And if we really wanted to, we could actually get another command out of this. Out of the observe the Sabbath and keep it holy, we could have actually extrapolated another commandment out of there if we wanted. Trying to be generous and simple, I'm trying to keep it down as low as possible. But there are 13 individual commands here in the 10 Commandments. But they're called the 10 Commandments, or the 10 words of God. Now, why is that? It's because there are 10 words, 10 individual commands in here. Each of these addressing quite separate sins. Now, the reason that they're divided out is some of them are elaborations on certain other sins. For example, we're going to go through one. The first commandment says, you shall not have any other gods beside me. Then it says, you shall not make for yourself an idol or a likeness of anything in the heavens above or on the earth below or in the water beneath the earth. You shall not bow down before them or serve them. Now, what is the commandment here? The commandment here is worship the Lord your God only. You shall not worship anything else. You shall not give anything else the divine trait. You shall not give acknowledge anything else as having an attribute that belongs to me only. So the commandment here is you shall not have other gods beside me. So again, like we said, the two main commandments are love the Lord your God with all your mind, with all your heart, with all your strength, with all your soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. We need the 10 commandments because the fact that we end up thinking this too simply, or we try to find ways around it and say, well, this isn't really breaking the commandments. So they make it explicit. Love the Lord your God only. Now, because of the culture they come from, this still is a little too simple. There's ways to find around it. So it becomes explicit. Don't make statutes. Do not make statues and apply to them divine attributes. Don't make statues and bow down to them as if they were God. He's not saying don't make any image whatsoever, because God commanded images to be made. He commanded the ark to be built and to make images as a cherubim on there. He commanded that Moses should make a bronze serpent and raise it in the desert. So it's not that any image shall not be made. It's you shall not make of yourself an idol or likeness of anything in the heavens above, on the earth below, or in the water beneath the sea. You shall not bow down before them or serve them. These are often called graven images. They're graven not just because we engrave them. They're graven because we make them and then we try to apply the divine attribute. This is what the Israelites did right after they agreed to the 10 Commandments. Is they built a calf and they said, "Hear, O Israel, is your Lord that brought you out of God of Egypt." And then what they did here too was, if we really pay attention to what's going on, is they weren't trying to worship a foreign god. They weren't trying to make something else in God's image, but they were trying to provide worship to God, to Yahweh God. But they didn't know how to do that. And they were stuck in this idea that whatever God there is an image of him. So they didn't think literally the golden calf brought them out of Egypt. But they decided that they were going to try and make an image of what they thought God was, and they were used to idol worship, and they were used to animal worship. So they made a golden calf, and they said, "This, O God," they said, "This, O Israel, is your God that led you out of Egypt." This golden calf represents what Yahweh God looks like. But that wasn't true. They ended up creating a false image of what God is, and they limited him because they couldn't understand. That's part of why the Ark of the Covenant was made the way it was, with the two cherubim, because he said, "I am the God that sits upon the cherubim." So there was the invisible God. He was trying to draw people to this, but this was something. But this was something in their age and time. It was very hard for people to understand the invisible God, that you could not even see his likeness. So because of that, that is why we group these first 3 commandments together as one commandment. It's because of the fact that it is one commandment. Worship God and God alone. That's why, again, Catholic Church has one commandment. You shall worship the God and God alone. You shall have no gods before him. Because all of these are different ways of violating that one word, worship God alone. The next one is rather simple because it's not extrapolated out into numerous commandments, but you shall not invoke the name of the Lord your God in vain. Now, this one is very important and is actually quite often misunderstood what it means here. But as for the meanings of these different commandments, we will actually go over these in the next 2 lessons. So that's what we typically call number 2, because the first 3 are one commandment. Now, the next 2 commandments we talked about said, "Observe the Sabbath, keep it holy, as the Lord your God commanded you." And it also says, "You shall not do any work, either you, your son, or your daughter, your male or female slave," and then it goes on. Now, again, these are combined, these 2 are combined by all traditions because of the fact that the commandment is keep holy the Sabbath. Now, it goes on and says, "You shall do no work on this day," because that is part of how you keep it holy. They didn't say that. If they didn't say, "You shall do no work, you or your slaves or your servants or your animals," then people would have said, "Okay, well, so I'm going to keep it holy. I'm going to acknowledge God. I'm going to pray, but I'm still going to get some work done." And God said, "No, this is not what the Sabbath is for. You are not supposed to be working this day. You're supposed to rest. You're supposed to relax. You're supposed to give praise to God. You're supposed to enjoy and enter into the rest that He is going to provide for us. So He provided us one day of rest now in preparation for the eternity of rest that we are going to enjoy after the resurrection. All right. Next command, honor your father and your mother as the Lord your God has commanded you. That's another very easy one because it's one command, honor your mother and father. Because again, there's a lot of reasons why, and we will go over this in both of the next two lessons actually. You shall not kill, simple command. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal, and you shall not bear dishonest witness against your neighbor. Simply, you shouldn't lie about your neighbor, and you really shouldn't lie in general. Now, these are the two that in a lot of traditions that they get combined. Again, these are traditions that combine these two. It goes, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife, and you shall not desire your neighbor's house or field, his male or female slave, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. Now, these, while they may seem similar, are actually two different commandments, because both of these are referring back to other commandments. You have the commandment, you shall not commit adultery. Well, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife is the coveting of your neighbor's wife is the desire to commit adultery. God's saying not only should you not commit adultery, you should not want to. And again, we'll go into a lot of reasons why not. Now, the next one is you shall not steal. Well, the commandment, you shall not desire your neighbor's house or field, his male or female slave, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor, is the fact that not only should you not steal, but you should not want to steal. You shall not want the things that belong to your neighbor to take them from him. So both of these are actually two very different commandments. The you shall not covet your neighbor's wife is essentially you shall not have lust for your neighbor or their wife. The next one, you shall not desire your neighbor's house or field, is you shall not have envy of your neighbor. Envy and lust have two very different natures of what they are and two different commandments that you're desiring to break, which is why they need to be separated. That is why these are two separate commandments in the Catholic Church. Now, this explains why we have the listing of the 10 commandments that we do for the Catholic Church. Now, if you look into it, there are actually 7 different traditions of the division of the 10 commandments. 7 different ways that have been handed down on how these commandments should be divided up to get the 10 commandments or the 10 words of God. So that is something that we do need to remember when we address the 10 commandments and when we go forward is the division of these 13 commands. You can make them 14 easily, just like I said. But the division of these 13 individual commands into 10 commandments, to 10 words of God, these are traditions that are passed down. Scripture, nowhere is it found in Scripture how these words are divided up. So when we look at it and we say, oh, there's 10 commandments, whenever someone makes a list of 10 commandments, that is a tradition that they are executing. That is a tradition they are following as to how these should be divided up, as to how these should be understood. We know that Scripture does say that there are 10 words, so yes, there are 10 words. But there's 13 commands. Why are certain commands grouped one way in one tradition and another way for the other? It's because they have a different tradition, a different method that has been handed down apart from Scripture, which dictates how these commandments should be understood. And in the Catholic Church, we do have something we could resort to. It is Holy Tradition, the inspired traditions taught by the apostles, which were not written down, they were handed down, and the teaching magisterium of the church were both authoritative along with Scripture, and in which all 3 of these, each one could be understood in the light of the 2 others. This is what prevents us from making mistakes in how we divide up the 10 commandments and how we understand. So thank you for listening into this lesson, and as I said, we are going to have 3 more parts of this that may be produced over the course of the next 3 months, or if I can produce them faster with the current situation with the COVID-19 virus, and I can put them out there, then we will do that. But this is the first part of a 4-part series on the 10 Commandments. Thank you for listening in, and God bless.